There's a particular kind of silence that lives in an archive. It's not an empty silence. It's a quiet that is heavy with the ghosts of a million unspoken stories. As the senior archivist for the university's special collections, I live my life surrounded by that silence. I spend my days with the letters of forgotten poets, the brittle maps of towns that no longer exist, and the personal diaries of Civil War soldiers. My job is to bring order to the past, to preserve the fragile paper on which history is written. Most people think my life is boring. I think it's a sanctuary. The scent of old paper and bookbinding glue is my perfume. The gentle rustle of manuscript pages is my music. Here, in the climate-controlled stillness of the university library's basement, I am the master of my own small, quiet kingdom, the world outside, with its noise and its ambition and its relentless demands. Can't touch me here. If you've ever found a strange kind of peace in a place that other people overlook, you know what I'm talking about. A quiet corner in a museum, a dusty antique shop, a library. There's a magic in those places. Hit that like button if you have a secret. Quiet place that feels more like home than anywhere else. My life is orderly, it's predictable, it's calm. And after the life I lived before this one, calm is the most precious commodity I know. My family, of course, sees it differently. To them, my quiet. Academic life is not a sanctuary. It's a failure. It's a slow, dusty surrender. The shrill ring of my cell phone was a violent intrusion into my peaceful afternoon. I was in the middle of cataloging a collection of letters from a Webuet codebreaker, my hands encased in white cotton gloves, my focus absolute. The phone's buzzing on the metal table sounded like an air raid siren in my quiet world. I sighed, carefully placed the letter I was holding back into its acid-free folder, and peeled off my gloves. The caller ID showed a photo of my younger sister, Charlotte, smiling dazzlingly from the deck of a sailboat. Charlotte does not call to chat. Charlotte calls when she needs something, usually for me to play a supporting role in the grand theatrical production of her perfect life. Amelia, darling, her voice, when I answered, was like a champagne cork popping. Did I catch you at a bad time? Were you busy dusting off some old bones? Hello, Charlotte, I said, my voice even. I was working. Yes. What can I do for you? Oh, don't be so formal, she chirped, completely missing the point that my formality was a defensive wall. I have the most fabulous news. You know Mom and Dad's 40th anniversary is next month, right? Well, Stephen and I have decided to throw them a proper party, a real gala. We've booked the main ballroom at the country club. We've hired an orchestra. And the guest list is simply to die for. The governor might even make an appearance. Stephen was my brother-in-law, a high-powered corporate attorney who moved through the world with the easy, predatory grace of a shark, together. He and Charlotte were a formidable force in the city's social scene. They were the living, breathing embodiment of my family's values, wealth, status, and appearance above all else. That sounds elaborate, I said. It's going to be the event of the season, she declared. And listen, Amelia, you simply must be there. It's on the third Saturday of next month. Mark your little calendar. I won't take no for an answer. It wasn't an invitation. It was a summons, a royal command. I'm not sure. Charlotte, I began. That's a busy time for the university archive, with the end of the semester. Amelia, don't be ridiculous. She cut me off, her breezy tone becoming sharp. It's one night. You owe it to Mom and Dad. It would look so strange if their other daughter wasn't there. People will talk. People will talk. The four great and terrible words that my family lived by. The opinions of near strangers were more important than the comfort or happiness of their own blood. My presence was required not because they wanted me there, but because my absence would be a crack in the perfect facade of their happy, successful family. To my family, I am a puzzle they gave up trying to solve long ago. I'm 52 years old. I am unmarried. I have no children. After a 25-year career in a vague, unimpressive records management job for the State Department in Washington, D.C., I took an early retirement and moved here to take this quiet, academic job, in their eyes. My life is a collection of failures. I remember my own retirement party, a small, sad affair in my D.C. apartment. My parents and Charlotte had come down for it. My father, after a few beers, had put his arm around my brother-in-law, Stephen. "This is a man who knows how to build a career," my father had said, clapping Stephen on the back. "A real legacy. Not like my Amelia. She topped out at GS-14. Good, steady work, I suppose, but no ambition. Content to just be a cog in the machine." A cog in the machine. That was his summary of my life's work. He had no idea. He couldn't have. My cover story had been my shield. Records management was the perfect description for my job, because it was both technically true and profoundly misleading. It sounded so mind-numbingly dull that no one ever asked follow-up questions. It allowed me to explain my frequent travel archival conferences, my long hours declassification deadlines, and my refusal to ever discuss the details of my work. It's all classified. You know, the truth was, the records I managed were some of the nation's most sensitive secrets. The machine my father thought I was a cog in, I had, for the last 5 years of my career, been one of the people running it. My real title wasn't records manager. It was Director, Central Analysis Division. But I couldn't tell them that. Their world was built of tangible things, stock portfolios, real estate holdings, luxury cars, Ivy League admissions for their children. My world was built of shadows and whispers, of information that could topple governments, of secrets that I would take to my grave. There was no way to bridge the two. So, I had let them believe their version of me, the quiet, slightly strange, unsuccessful older sister, Amelia, the archivist, Amelia, the failure. "And you'll need a new dress." Charlotte's voice snapped me back to the present. "Something festive. Not one of your gray librarian outfits. Stephen and I would be happy to give you an advance on your Christmas present to help you find something suitable." The casual cruelty of it, the assumption that I was not only poorly dressed but also poor, was breathtaking. But I didn't rise to the bait. Arguing with Charlotte was like wrestling with a ghost. It was exhausting, and you could never land a punch. "That's very generous of you, Charlotte, but I think I can manage," I said, my voice as dry as ancient parchment. "Well, just as long as you make an effort. This is important for Mom and Dad. They deserve a perfect night. They deserve to have their children perform their assigned roles perfectly." That's what she meant. She needed me to play my part, the dowdy, quiet spinster who would highlight, by contrast, her own glittering success. I looked around my office, at the neat stacks of archival boxes, at the faint, dusty light filtering through the high basement window. This was my piece. This was my reality. The party, the gala, felt like a transmission from a hostile, alien world, a world I had escaped. And now they were trying to pull me back in. Why say yes, it's a fair question? Why subject myself to an evening of passive aggression and pitying looks? The answer, I suppose, is complicated. There is still a stubborn, residual sense of duty that churns within me, a daughter's duty, but there's something else. 2. A professional curiosity. My job for decades was to analyze complex systems, to understand the motivations and behaviors of people. My own family is the most complex, baffling system I've ever encountered. Going to the party would be data collection. It would be a final field study before I decided, once and for all, whether to declassify my own life or to seal the file forever. "I'll be there, Charlotte," I said, the words feeling like a strategic concession. "Wonderful," she trilled. Her mission accomplished. "I'll have my assistant send you all the details. Kisses, bye." The line went dead. The silence of the archive rushed back in to fill the void. But it felt different now. It felt less like a sanctuary and more like a bunker. The date of the party was now on my calendar. A red circle marking a future engagement with the enemy, an enemy that looked, unfortunately, exactly like me. I stood up and walked over to a locked cabinet in the corner of my office, from a chain around my neck, hidden beneath my blouse. I took out a small, unassuming key and opened it. Inside was a single, plain, gray box. I lifted the lid. Nestled in the foam cutout was a medal, not a military one, a civilian one. The National Intelligence Distinguished Service Medal. It was one of the highest honors awarded in the U.S. intelligence community. It had been presented to me in a closed-door ceremony at Langley by the Director of National Intelligence, the citation, which was classified. spoke of my leadership during a global crisis that the public never even knew had happened. I looked at the medal, the tangible proof of a life my family knew nothing about. Then I closed the box, locked the cabinet, and tucked the key back under my shirt. I was Director Amelia Vance, a woman who had managed some of the world's most dangerous secrets. Surely, I could manage one more night with my family. Have you ever lived a double life? I'm not talking about the cool, glamorous, spy movie kind, where you're sipping martinis in Monaco one night and defusing a bomb the next. I'm talking about the quieter, more exhausting kind. The kind where one life is your truth complex, demanding, and real, and the other is a carefully constructed, simplified performance for the benefit of the people who are supposed to know you best. For 25 years, I was the star and sole cast member of that one-woman show. The title of the play was Amelia Vance, the boring, unambitious daughter. It always got rave reviews from its target audience, my family. The week before my parents' anniversary party was spent in quiet preparation, not for the party itself, but for the role I was expected to play. It began, as it always did, with the costume. I stood in front of my closet, which was a sea of sensible, muted colors: charcoal gray, navy blue, soft beige. It was the wardrobe of a woman who had spent decades trying not to be noticed. The perfect camouflage for a life lived in the shadows. I pulled out a simple, gray cashmere dress. It was elegant, respectable, and profoundly dull. It was the kind of dress that would earn a nod of approval from my mother, not a compliment, but an absence of criticism, which was the best I could ever hope for. As I held the soft fabric in my hands, the texture, the color, it was like a key unlocking a door to another world. Suddenly, I wasn't in my quiet suburban bedroom anymore. I was standing in a windowless, soundproof room 3 levels below the ground in Langley, Virginia. The air hummed with the quiet power of servers and secure ventilation. The room was known as the Vault. On the wall in front of me, a massive screen showed a live satellite feed of a port in the Black Sea. Around the polished mahogany table sat a collection of the most powerful people in the United States: the Secretary of Defense, the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the National Security Advisor, and 2 other 4-star generals. They were all looking at me, and on a secure video link from the White House Situation Room. The President of the United States was watching, his face grim. I was 38 years old, a mid-level division chief at the time. I was the youngest person in the room, and the only woman. So, what you're telling me, Miss Vance, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, a bulldog of a man named General Morrison, said, his voice gruff, is that our intelligence is wrong? The intel that my people on the ground have gathered, the intel that says those cargo containers are full of agricultural equipment, is wrong. No, General, I said, my voice calm and steady, betraying none of the adrenaline coursing through my veins. I'm not saying your intelligence is wrong. I'm saying it's incomplete. Your agents on the ground are seeing exactly what they're supposed to see: agricultural equipment. But our signals intelligence, cross-referenced with financial transactions we've tracked through a shell corporation in Cyprus, indicates that hidden beneath that equipment, in shielded compartments, are components for a medium-range ballistic missile system. They are being sold to a rogue state, in direct violation of international sanctions. A tense silence filled the room. General Morrison stared at me, his skepticism a palpable force. That's a hell of an accusation. Ms. Vance, you're asking us to authorize a major international incident based on financial records and whispers in the static. Before I could answer, the president's voice came through the speaker. Let her finish. Mark, I nodded at the screen. Mr. President, it's more than whispers. For the past 72 hours, my team has been analyzing the metadata from all cellular activity within a 5-kilometer radius of the port. We found a single, encrypted burst transmission to a known number associated with the rogue state's intelligence service. It lasted less than a second, but we have it, and the financial footprint is undeniable. The Shell Corporation in Cyprus was funded by the same Black Ops budget that paid for the assassination of a dissident journalist last year. This is their signature. I pointed to a smaller screen showing a complex flowchart of names and numbers. The story isn't in the cargo containers, General. The story is in the data, and the data says those missiles are real. I presented my analysis for another 10 minutes. When I was finished, the silence in the room was absolute. General Morrison just stared at me. Then he looked at his own intelligence chief, who simply shook his head, conceding the point. The president's face was grim. "Thank you, Miss Vance. You've given me a lot to think about." The meeting ended. The crisis was averted through a quiet, diplomatic channel, backed by the irrefutable threat of what we knew. No shots were fired, no headlines were written. It was a victory won in silence, with data as our only weapon. As I was packing up my files, General Morrison walked over to me. "Vance," he said, "that was some of the finest analytical work I've ever seen. You've got ice water in your veins." That night, I had called my mother to wish her a happy birthday. "Oh, Amelia, thank you. Darling," she'd said, "we're just having a quiet dinner at home. Your sister and Stephen are here. He just made partner at his firm. We're so proud. It's a real career, you know? Something with a future. How are things with you, still managing those dusty old records?" Something like that. "Mom," I had said. The praise of a 4-star general still ringing in my ears. Just another day at the office. A sharp rap on my bedroom door brought me back to the present. It was a memory, not a real knock, a phantom of the past. I was still standing in my bedroom, holding the gray cashmere dress. The chasm between my two lives, my two selves, was so vast it made me dizzy. I put the dress back in the closet. It felt wrong. It was the costume of the woman they thought I was. And I was tired of playing the part. My life had been a long series of these moments, these jarring juxtapositions. I remembered the year my father had a health scare. It was a minor heart issue, but it required surgery. I was, at the time, the newly promoted deputy director. And I was in the middle of managing the intelligence fallout from a coup in a nuclear-armed state. It was the most intense, demanding 6 weeks of my career. I was sleeping an average of 3 hours a night, living on stale coffee and adrenaline, briefing congressional committees and foreign ambassadors. My analysis directly influencing global policy. I couldn't go home for my father's surgery. I told my family I had an unavoidable work conference in Brussels. Charlotte had been furious with me, a conference she'd shrieked at me over the phone. "Dad is having heart surgery. And you're going to a conference. What is wrong with you?" "Amelia, do you have any idea how selfish that is? You just don't care about this family." I had sat in my secure office, looking out over the Potomac River, a satellite phone on my desk for a call with the Prime Minister of the UK, and I listened to my sister lecture me on the importance of family. The irony was a physical pain. I couldn't tell her that my conference was a desperate, last-ditch effort to prevent a regional war. I couldn't tell her that the weight on my shoulders was so much heavier than my father's diagnosis. So I just took it. I absorbed her anger, her disappointment. It was part of the job. The personal cost of a secret life. My father, of course, was fine. And my family had another piece of evidence for their file on me, Amelia. The cold, selfish daughter who puts her boring job before her own family. I walked over to my dresser and opened a small, wooden box. Inside were a few pieces of jewelry I never wore. And a small, simple man's watch. A Rolex. It had belonged to a man named Ben. He was a field agent, one of my best. He was smart, funny, and brave. We had been close. As close as you could be in our world. It was a quiet, unspoken thing. A relationship that lived in late-night phone calls from foreign capitals and shared glances across secure briefing rooms. He had been killed in an ambush in Yemen. His death had been my responsibility. I had approved the mission. I had analyzed the intelligence that said the route was safe. The intelligence was wrong. I had been the one to write the letter to his parents. I had been the one to sit with the president and explain what had happened. It was the single greatest failure of my professional life. His watch was the only personal effect they had recovered. His parents had sent it to me. There was no note. None was needed. I held the cool, heavy watch in my palm. This was the reality of my life. This was the weight. This was the cost. And in 2 weeks, I was supposed to go to a party and make small talk about the stock market and my sister's new kitchen renovation. The whole thing felt like a farce. A joke in very poor taste. For a moment, I considered just calling Charlotte and telling her I wasn't coming. I considered cutting them off completely, disappearing back into the quiet archives and letting them have their perfect, uncomplicated world without me in it. But then I remembered General Morrison's words. "You've got ice water in your veins." He meant it as a compliment to my professional composure. But maybe it was true in other ways, too. Maybe. After everything I had seen, everything I had done, I had become too cold, too detached. Maybe I owed it to them, and to myself, to see this through one last time, to walk onto their stage, into their world, not as a performer, but as an observer, to see if there was anything left of the woman they were supposed to love, and anything left of the love I was supposed to feel for them. I went back to the closet. I pushed aside the grays and the navies. In the very back, preserved in a garment bag, was a dress I had forgotten I owned. It was a deep emerald green, the color of my eyes. It was a simple, elegant sheath, made of a heavy, luxurious silk. It had a sharp, clean V-neck and tailored, 3/4-length sleeves. It was not a dress for a librarian or an archivist. It was not a dress for a nobody. It was a dress for a woman of quiet, confident power. It was a dress for a director. I took it out of the bag. I would wear this, not for them. For me, it was a silent, personal declaration of intent. I would not be a ghost at this feast. I would be myself. And I would let the consequences fall where they may. The country club was exactly as I remembered it, a sprawling temple dedicated to the worship of money and status. The long, winding driveway was lined with luxury cars that cost more than my house. The air in the grand ballroom was heavy with the scent of lilies and entitlement. A small orchestra was playing something classical and expensive in the corner. It was my sister Charlotte's natural habitat. For me, it felt like infiltrating a foreign embassy without diplomatic immunity. I handed my keys to the valet and walked up the stone steps, the heavy silk of my emerald dress moving around my legs. I had chosen my armor, and as I stepped through the ornate doors, I felt a strange sense of calm. This wasn't my battlefield, but I knew the rules of engagement for the first time in a long time. I wasn't here as a reluctant participant. I was here as a foreign observer, on a mission to gather final intelligence before pulling my assets out for good. They were holding court near the massive floral centerpiece, a perfect tableau of family success. My parents, looking handsome and distinguished, my brother-in-law, Stephen, looking sleek and powerful in his custom-tailored tuxedo, and my sister, Charlotte, in a shimmering gold dress, looking like the queen of the entire affair. And let me tell you, when you walk into a room where you know you're the designated family tragedy, the air feels different. It's a subtle pressure change, a shift in the atmosphere that only you can feel. Charlotte saw me first, and her perfectly painted smile faltered for a fraction of a second. She took in my dress, the deep, rich color, the elegant cut, the quiet statement of power it made. It wasn't the dress of the sad librarian she had been expecting. For a moment, a flicker of something surprise competition crossed her face before she masked it with her usual bright enthusiasm. "Amelia, you came and look at you," she said, her voice a little too loud. She air-kissed me, her perfume enveloping me in a cloud of jasmine and condescension. A new dress. What a bold color. Stephen. Look, doesn't Amelia look dramatic? Stephen turned, giving me a quick, dismissive once-over. Very nice. Amelia? Glad you could make it out of your dusty library for a night. He was already turning away, his attention snagged by a man he recognized across the room. My mother fussed over me next. Oh, Amelia. Dear, that green is a bit much. Isn't it for a family party you'll stand out? I think that's the point, Mom, I said with a faint smile she didn't understand. My father, Richard, clapped me on the shoulder. There's my bookworm, left the archives behind for one night. Good for you. Now, have you seen the ice sculpture? They've carved a swan. A swan cost a fortune, Charlotte tells me. Their greetings were a masterclass in the family's native language, the backhanded compliment, the casual dismissal, the immediate pivot to something more important, more expensive. They saw my dress, but they didn't see me. They couldn't. My presence was a social problem they had to manage. and my unexpected elegance had just made their job a little bit harder. The cocktail hour was a minefield of polite inquiries and pitying glances. I got myself a club soda with lime. I needed to keep a clear head and tried to find a quiet corner. But my family, determined to perform their roles as a loving, inclusive unit, kept trying to involve me. Stephen brought over one of his law partners, a man with a booming voice named George. George, this is my sister-in-law, Amelia Vance, he said. George shook my hand. A pleasure. So, Amelia, what do you do? It was the inevitable question. Before I could even open my mouth to deliver my well-rehearsed, boring cover story, Charlotte glided over and answered for me. Oh. Amelia is our family's scholar, she announced, patting my arm. She's a brilliant archivist at the university. She spends her days with old letters and dusty books. Utterly fascinating, but so over my head. She said it with a laugh, as if she were proud of me, but the message was clear, delivered with surgical precision to George and everyone else within earshot. My sister is a harmless, intellectual eccentric. She is not a player. She is not important. You don't need to waste your time talking to her. George's eyes glazed over instantly. Oh, an archivist. How quaint. He immediately turned back to Stephen to talk about a recent merger. I had been defined, categorized, and dismissed in under 10 seconds. I just smiled, took a sip of my club soda, and mentally filed the interaction away. Exhibita invalidation via trivialization. Later, my great-aunt Carol cornered me by the shrimp cocktail. Amelia, dear, you look well, but tired. Are you getting enough sleep? It's not healthy for a woman your age to be alone so much. Have you tried those dating apps? My neighbor's daughter met a lovely periodontist on one of them. I'm quite content. Aunt Carol, I said. Nonsense, she sniffed. No woman is content without a man to take care of her. You were always so independent. That was your problem. Exhibit B, the patriarchy delivers its regards. The call for dinner was a welcome reprieve. We were seated at the head table, the place of honor. I was seated at the far end, next to my father. It was a position that was simultaneously prominent and invisible. The dinner conversation was a symphony of status. Stephen talked about a case he'd won for a major pharmaceutical company. Charlotte talked about her recent fundraising success for the art museum, name-dropping every important person who had attended her gala. My father talked about his stock portfolio. My mother talked about their upcoming trip to Tuscany. They would occasionally try to include me. Amelia, you went to Europe once for work, didn't you? My mother asked. Was it nice? I thought of my trip to Europe. A tense, 3-day meeting in a secure facility in Geneva, trying to avert a brewing conflict between two hostile nations based on fragmented intelligence. We hadn't been allowed to leave the building. It was very productive, Mom, I said. Productive, my father laughed. That's our Amelia. Always productive, never having any fun. I watched them, and for the first time, I felt no sting. The anger I had felt after our last encounter had cooled into a kind of detached, anthropological curiosity. I was watching a tribe perform its rituals. The ritual of self-aggrandizement, the ritual of conspicuous consumption, the ritual of reinforcing the social hierarchy. And their hierarchy required a bottom rung. That was my role. I was the foundation upon which their success was built. Without my failure to hold them up, they would all be a little shorter. The main course was cleared. The champagne was poured. My father stood up, tapping his glass with a fork. A warm, practiced smile was on his face. It was time for the main event. My friends, my family, he began, his voice resonating with emotion. 40 years ago, I married the most beautiful woman in the world, and every day since has been a gift. He smiled at my mother, who beamed back at him. It was a good start. A man measures his life by his legacy, he continued. And when I look at my legacy, I am a very, very wealthy man, not in dollars. Though we've done all right there. He paused for the expected chuckle from the crowd, but in what truly matters, family. He looked at Charlotte, my daughter, Charlotte, who has the biggest heart and the best taste of anyone I know. She has built a beautiful life, a beautiful home, and has been a pillar of our community. He looked at Stephen, my son-in-law, Stephen, who has a mind like a steel trap and a work ethic to match. He is a provider, a leader, a man of substance. He looked at their 2 children, my niece and nephew, sitting at a nearby table, and my grandchildren, who are the joy of our lives. His gaze swept the room, full of pride and satisfaction. He was painting a perfect picture, a portrait of a successful life, and then his eyes landed on me. He smiled a gentle, pitying smile, the smile you give a beloved but slightly disappointing pet. "And of course," he said, his voice softening into a tone of gentle condescension, "my daughter, Amelia, our scholar, while the rest of us have been busy in the loud, messy world of business and family, she has been a quiet custodian of the past. She reminds us that not all contributions are measured on the stock market. Some are measured in dusty old books and quiet libraries." He made it sound like a compliment, but it was a public execution. He had, in front of 200 of their closest friends and associates, defined my entire life as a quaint, irrelevant, dusty little hobby. He had patted me on the head and dismissed me as a child. He had cemented my status as the family footnote. "So let's raise a glass," he concluded, his voice booming again, "to 40 years of love, laughter, and a legacy to be proud of. To my wife, Patricia." The room erupted in applause. "To Patricia." I picked up my champagne glass. I looked across the table at my father, who was now accepting congratulations. Basking in the glow of his own performance, our eyes met for a moment. I smiled at him, a real, genuine, serene smile, and I raised my glass to him. He looked momentarily confused. He had expected me to look hurt or to look down in shame. He didn't know what to do with my smile. He didn't know that it was a smile of goodbye. He didn't know that this was the moment I was finally closing the file on him. On all of them, the intelligence gathering phase of my operation was complete, and the final report was clear. No signs of intelligent life. My father's toast was the period at the end of a long and painful sentence. After the polite applause died down, a strained atmosphere settled over our table. My family, masters of denial, immediately tried to pretend that nothing had happened. My mother began asking my brother-in-law, Stephen, about his golf game. My father launched into a loud, pointless argument with my aunt about property taxes. They were creating noise, a smokescreen of triviality to cover the gaping hole my father's words had blown in the center of the table. I, for my part, was a statue of calm. I finished my champagne, dabbed my lips with my napkin, and stood up. "If you'll excuse me," I said to no one in particular, "I think I'll get some fresh air." My mother looked up, a flicker of panic in her eyes. "Amelia, don't make a scene." "I have no intention of making a scene." "Mom," I said, my voice quiet and even, "I am just going for a walk." I moved away from the table, my steps measured and sure. Walking through the grand ballroom felt like moving through water. The noise, the laughter, the clinking glasses, it all felt distant, happening to other people in another world. I was no longer a part of it. The ghost at the feast had decided to go for a haunt. I found a set of glass doors that led out to a beautifully manicured stone terrace overlooking the golf course. The cool night air was a relief, washing over my face and clearing my head. The orchestra music was a faint, elegant murmur from here. I leaned against the stone balustrade, the rough texture grounding me, and looked up at the stars, countless and indifferent. For 25 years, I had navigated a world of secrets, where a single misplaced word could have catastrophic consequences. And yet, the most damaging words I had ever heard had been spoken by my own father, in a room full of crystal and flowers. With a loving smile on his face, the irony was so profound. It was almost elegant. I wasn't angry anymore. The toast hadn't been a wound, it had been a diagnosis. It confirmed, with clinical precision, the nature of my family's blindness. They were not malicious, not in the way a true enemy is. They were something far more insidious. They were utterly, profoundly, and willfully ignorant. They had the story of me they wanted to believe, and they would not allow any facts to get in the way of that narrative. And I knew, standing there under the vast, silent sky, that I was done trying to present them with evidence. The case was closed. After a few minutes of quiet contemplation, I decided to head back inside, but not to the main ballroom. I wasn't ready for another encounter with Aunt Carol and her dating advice. Instead, I wandered into the country club's adjoining library bar. It was a quieter, more civilized space, paneled in dark wood and lined with leather-bound books that no one ever read. A few small groups were scattered around, talking in hushed tones. And that's where I saw him. My brother-in-law, Stephen, was holding court at the bar with a group of 3 other men. They were all in expensive tuxedos, all with the same slick, confident air of corporate lawyers who bill by the minute. Stephen was in the middle of a story, gesticulating with his glass of ridiculously expensive scotch. I had no intention of joining them. My plan was to slip into a dark corner and enjoy the relative peace. But Stephen spotted me. His eyes lit up with the kind of predatory glee that meant he'd just found a new way to demonstrate his own importance. "Amelia," he called out, his voice booming in the quiet room. "Come over here. There's someone I want you to meet." Trapped, I took a slow breath and walked over, my polite social mask firmly in place. "Everyone," Stephen announced grandly, putting a proprietary arm around my shoulder. "This is my wife's sister, the mysterious Amelia. She's the scholar of the family. Hides away in a university library all day with dusty old books." The men all gave me a polite, uninterested smile. I was a curiosity, a quaint little sideshow to their evening. "Amelia. This is Mark. Bill, and I'm sorry, what was your name again?" Stephen asked, turning to the 4th man, who had been listening to the conversation with a quiet, watchful stillness. The man was in his late 40s, with sharp, intelligent eyes and a calm, centered demeanor that was completely at odds with the loud, performative arrogance of the lawyers around him. He was dressed in a simple, well-tailored suit, not a tuxedo. He was, I realized, the only person in the room who looked truly comfortable in his own skin. "David Miller," he said, his voice quiet but clear. He extended a hand to me. "A pleasure to meet you." His handshake was firm, his gaze direct. "Amelia Vance," I replied. "Bill here brought David along tonight." Stephen explained. "He's down from D.C. for a few days. Works for the government, just like you used to. Amelia, you two probably have all sorts of boring bureaucratic stories to share." Stephen laughed, immensely pleased with his own joke. I just smiled faintly. David Miller didn't laugh. He just watched me, his expression unreadable. The conversation immediately turned back to a big, ugly corporate lawsuit the lawyers were all involved in. They talked about depositions and discovery and billable hours. I was perfectly content to be ignored. To nurse my club soda and become part of the wallpaper, I stood there, a silent observer, my mind a million miles away. But I could feel his eyes on me. It started as a series of quick, furtive glances. David Miller would be nodding along to whatever Stephen was saying, but his eyes would flick over to me for a second, then away again. It wasn't a flirtatious look. It wasn't a look of idle curiosity. It was the focused, analytical gaze of a man trying to solve a puzzle. And this is the part of the story, you guys, where everything slows down. This is the moment when you feel the tumblers in the lock of fate begin to click into place. My old training, long dormant, began to stir. I didn't turn to look at him, but I was aware of him in my peripheral vision. I cataloged his appearance fit, but not in a gym bro way. The way he stood relaxed, but perfectly balanced, ready to move. The way he listened more than he talked. The way his eyes scanned the room, not just looking, but assessing. He wasn't a lawyer, he wasn't a corporate guy. I didn't know what he was, but he was a professional, and his professional instincts were currently pinging, hard, in my direction. He was trying to place me. His brow was slightly furrowed. He would look at my face, then down at my simple dress, then back at my face. He was trying to reconcile the image in front of him with an image in his memory, and the two were not matching up. I tried to make myself smaller, to project an aura of complete, uninteresting harmlessness. I focused on a painting on the wall, feigning a deep interest in a poorly rendered landscape. Let it go, I thought. I'm just the weird sister-in-law, nothing to see here. But he wasn't letting it go. The glances became longer, more intense. The other lawyers were now deep into a loud, drunken argument about whose firm had the bigger summer bonus pool. They were oblivious. They had created a bubble of self-importance, and David Miller and I were on the outside of it, a silent, two-person drama unfolding in their midst. I risked a direct look at him. Our eyes met for a second across the space. The polite social mask on his face was gone. His eyes were narrowed in intense concentration. The look on his face was one of dawning, staggering disbelief. He knew. He had placed me. And he could not believe it. He pushed himself off the bar stool he was leaning against. He murmured something to the man next to him, who was too busy arguing to notice. He started to walk toward me. My heart, which had been calm all night, gave a single, hard thud against my ribs. My training screamed at me, abort, evade, deny, my cover, my quiet life. My entire carefully constructed narrative was about to be blown sky high by a chance encounter in a country club bar. I could have turned and walked away. I could have feigned a trip to the ladies' room, but I didn't. I just stood my ground, my back straight, and watched him approach, because after my father's toast, after a lifetime of being their nobody, a strange, defiant part of me was suddenly, intensely curious to see what would happen when someone from my real world finally told them who I was. He stopped in front of me, his face a mixture of awe and profound confusion. The loud, braying laughter of my brother-in-law and his friends faded into a distant, meaningless noise. The world had narrowed to this single, quiet, explosive moment. "Excuse me," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "I know this is going to sound impossible, but you're her, aren't you?" The noisy, self-important chatter of my brother-in-law's circle faded into a distant buzz. The world narrowed to the space between me and David Miller, the quiet man with the observant eyes who was looking at me as if he'd just seen a ghost. "You're her, aren't you?" he repeated, his voice barely a whisper, but it was filled with a dawning, absolute certainty. For a heartbeat, I considered denying it. I could have laughed it off, told him he had the wrong person, and vanished back into my quiet life. The archivist persona was a well-worn, comfortable coat. Taking it off now, here, in this place, would be an act of war. But then I thought of my father's toast. I thought of my sister's pity. I thought of the word nobody. And I realized I was done being a ghost. I didn't smile. I didn't speak. I simply met his gaze and gave him a single, almost imperceptible nod. The shift in his demeanor was instantaneous and profound. The last vestiges of casual curiosity vanished, replaced by a deep, ingrained, professional respect. He stood up a little straighter, his shoulders squaring in a subtle gesture of attention that only someone from my former world would recognize. "Ma'am," he said, and the single word was a thunderclap in the quiet bar. My brother-in-law, Stephen, who had been in the middle of a boastful laugh, stopped short, his mouth hanging open. The other lawyers turned to stare. The word, "ma'am," spoken with that tone of deference, was so completely out of context, so alien to their perception of me, that it broke the spell of their conversation. My family, sensing the shift in the atmosphere, began to drift over from the main ballroom, their faces etched with curiosity and suspicion. What was this stranger saying to their Amelia? David Miller was oblivious to the audience we were gathering. His focus was entirely on me. "Forgive the intrusion," he said, his voice now clear and formal. "Director Vance." My full name, my old title. Hearing it spoken aloud in front of my family was a surreal, out-of-body experience. It was like watching two parallel universes collide. Charlotte had reached us, a confused frown on her face. "Director, I'm sorry, who are you, Amelia? What is he talking about?" But David Miller wasn't finished. He had locked onto a truth, and he was not letting go. He looked at me, a man finally meeting a figure he had only known by reputation, by legend. "I was stationed in the Berlin field office from 2015 to 2018, he said, his voice resonating with conviction. "I served under you. I served under you." There it was, the payload, the irrefutable, world-shattering truth. Not just that I was a director, but that I was his director. That this quiet, bookish woman they pitied had been in a position of command over this sharp, confident man. Stephen, the arrogant corporate lawyer, was the first to process the words. His jaw literally dropped. He looked from the quiet, serious federal agent to me, the sister-in-law he'd just dismissed as a scholar, and his entire worldview seemed to be short-circuiting. My father and mother arrived, drawn by the strange, tense silence. "What's going on here?" my father demanded. "Amelia, who is this man?" David Miller, perhaps feeling the need to further explain the impossible, added the final, devastating piece of corroboration. "Your analysis of the intelligence leading up to the Caspian incident. Director," he said, his eyes full of the memory of it. It was groundbreaking. It was required reading for every analyst in the European theater for a year. "You saved a lot of lives with that report. Ma'am, it's a genuine honor to finally meet you in person. The Caspian incident, a covert, high-stakes intelligence operation that had prevented a conflict between two nuclear-armed nations. It had never made the news. It was a ghost story, a secret history known only to a handful of people at the highest levels of power, and this man had just laid it at my family's feet." The silence that followed was absolute. It was the silence of a universe being unmade. Then, the chaos. "Director," my father sputtered, the word sounding absurd on his tongue. "What directorship you managed, records you told us." "The Caspian," what Charlotte cried, her voice rising in panic and confusion. "Amelia, what is he talking about? Is this a joke?" My mother just stood there, her face ashen, her hand clutching my father's arm as if she were about to faint. They turned on me then, a frantic, accusing mob. Their shock was instantly curdling into a hot, defensive anger, not pride, not awe, but the fury of people who have just been made to look like complete and utter fools. "You lied to us," my father roared, his face turning a blotchy red. "For decades you let us believe you were nothing, a nobody. You let me toast you as a bookworm," he continued, his voice cracking with humiliation. "In front of everyone, you made a fool of me." "And me," Charlotte chimed in, tears of rage and shame filling her eyes. "I pitied you. I spent years feeling sorry for you. How could you do this to us?" They were like a pack of wolves, turning on the one member who had revealed herself to be a lion. Their accusations were not about my deception. They were about their own embarrassment. Their wound was not one of betrayal. It was one of pride. And that was all I needed to see. I held up a hand, the same calm, simple gesture I had used at the dinner table. And just like before, the sheer unexpected authority of it stopped them cold. I turned first to David Miller, who was watching the family meltdown with the horrified fascination of a man who had accidentally stumbled into a cage of angry animals. "Agent Miller," I said, my voice cutting cleanly through the emotional chaos. He flinched slightly at the title, but his eyes met mine. "It's good to see you. Thank you for your service in Berlin. You and your team did exceptional work." "Ma'am, Director, he stammered, completely out of his depth. "We can reminisce about old times later," I said, giving him a small dismissive smile. It was a clear, polite order. "I'm sure you have friends to get back to." He understood immediately. "Yes, Director, of course." He gave a curt, professional nod, cast one last, bewildered look at my family, and beat a hasty retreat. Now, it was just me and them. They stared at me, their anger momentarily silenced by the calm, authoritative way I had just handled the agent. I had taken command of the situation. I had taken command of them. "You want to know why I never told you?" I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. "You're asking the wrong question. The question isn't why I didn't tell you. The question is, why would I have?" I looked at my father. "You want to talk about lies? Let's talk about the lie you told yourself for 30 years. The lie about your disappointing, unambitious daughter. You needed me to be a failure. Dad, you needed it. Because my choices terrified you. A woman with power, a woman who didn't need a man. A woman whose life you couldn't understand or control, that didn't fit in your world. So you invented a version of me that did." I turned to Charlotte. "And you. You needed me to be the sad, lonely spinster, because it made your own life seem so much more glamorous by comparison. My failure was the backdrop for your success. You never once asked me a single, genuine question about my work, because you were afraid the answer might be more interesting than your latest charity gala. I let my gaze sweep over all of them. My life was not a secret I kept from you. It was a world I protected from you. The things I've done, the places I've been, the burdens I've carried. They are not for you. They are not for your judgment, or your pity, or your sudden, convenient pride. My life was classified, not just by the United States government, by me, and you were never, ever cleared to receive the information. I paused, letting the finality of it settle in their minds. So, no, I said, my voice softening just a fraction, but losing none of its steel. I did not make fools of you. You did that all on your own, with every condescending comment, every pitying look, every single time you chose to see the fiction instead of the person standing right in front of you. I picked up my small clutch purse from a nearby table. Thank you for the party, Charlotte. It has been, as I said before, very illuminating. With that, I turned my back on their stunned, speechless faces. I walked out of the bar, through the lobby, and out the front doors of the country club. I left them standing in the ruins of the comfortable, carefully constructed lies they had built their family on. And as the cool night air hit my face, I felt the last, heavy weight of their world lift from my shoulders, once and for all. I was no longer their daughter. I was no longer their sister. I was just Amelia, and for the first time, that was more than enough. I drove home that night with the windows down. Even though the air was chilly, I wanted to feel something real, something clean. The sterile, perfume-choked atmosphere of the country club felt like a contaminant I needed to wash away. I didn't speed. I didn't race away with adrenaline. I drove slowly, calmly, feeling the weight of a lifetime of performance finally, truly, lifting from my shoulders. It was a strange, light-headed feeling. It was the feeling of freedom. My small, quiet house had never felt more like a sanctuary. It was a space that was entirely mine, filled only with the things I had chosen, my books, my quiet, my history. That night, I slept more soundly than I had in 30 years. There were no ghosts at my bedside. The file was closed. The silence from my family in the week that followed was deafening. It was a silence born not of anger, but of utter, systemic shock. They had discovered that a person they thought was a simple, black-and-white photograph was, in fact, a classified, 1,000-page dossier written in a language they couldn't read. They had no idea what to say. So, for once, they said nothing. I didn't reach out. I went about my life. I went to the university archive. I lost myself in the delicate, painstaking work of preserving the letters of a 19th-century botanist. The work was meditative. It was about touching the past, understanding another life, honoring another's story. It was everything my family had never done for me. I found a profound, simple joy in it. My world was no longer divided. The quiet archivist was not a costume anymore. She was simply me, the woman who, after a lifetime of managing the world's secrets, had chosen to spend her days managing quiet, gentle truths. The first attempt at contact came, predictably, from Charlotte. It was a text message that arrived nearly 2 weeks after the party. Amelia, are you alive? Mom is a wreck. People are talking. Please call me. The tone was a chaotic mix of accusation, curiosity, and desperation. I looked at the message, took a sip of my morning tea, and went back to reading my book. I would call her, but on my own time. The power to initiate contact, to set the terms of engagement, was now mine. It was the most important boundary of all. I called her 2 days later. Amelia, thank God, she answered, her voice a frantic whisper. Where have you been? Do you have any idea what you've done? I've been at work, Charlotte, I said calmly. What have I done? What have you? She sputtered. Stephen's law partners are asking him questions. My friends are looking at me differently. Dad's golf buddies are treating him like he's some kind of spy. And that man, that Agent Miller, his brother called Mom and Dad to thank them for you. He wants to donate to the library in your name. It's a complete mess. I listened to her litany of social inconveniences. It was all about them. How this new truth was affecting their social standing, their reputation. So, to be clear, I said, my voice dangerously soft. The problem is that you've all discovered that your failure of a sister was, in fact, highly successful in a field you don't understand. And the reflection of that success is making you uncomfortable. No, it's just you lied to us. Amelia, you let us think you were this sad little librarian. First, I said, there is nothing sad about being a librarian or an archivist. And second, I didn't lie. I just stopped reporting to a chain of command that was no longer authorized to receive the information. My life was, and remains, classified, and you, Charlotte, do not have the clearance. There was a stunned silence on the other end. She had never been spoken to like this before, with such calm, dismissive authority. What do you want from us? She finally whispered. Nothing, I said. And the truth of that single word was the most powerful thing I had ever felt. I don't want anything from you. Not your approval, not your pride, not your pity, nothing. I just want to be left alone to live my life, the one I chose. That conversation set the tone for the new world order my parents tried next. They showed up at my house unannounced, a tactic that had always worked before. I saw them through the window, standing on my front porch, looking lost and uncertain. I let them stand there for a full minute before I opened the door. They were full of clumsy, self-pitying apologies. We had no idea, Amelia, my father said, his eyes unable to meet mine. A director, all that responsibility. You should have told us. Would you have believed me, I asked him, or would you have thought it was just another one of my strange stories? He had no answer. They wanted details. They were hungry for the stories they now felt they were entitled to. Was it dangerous? Had I met spies? Did I carry a gun? They wanted the movie version. They wanted to consume my life as a thrilling narrative. A new, more interesting trophy to display. I refused to give it to them. My work is in the past, I told them, standing in my own doorway. A polite but impassable barrier. It's over. I am an archivist now. That is all you need to know. If you want to have a relationship with the person I am today, I am open to that, but the woman I was is not available for discussion. It was a hard boundary, and they tested it, again and again. But I held the line. My life was not their entertainment. My sacrifices were not their gossip. Slowly, painstakingly, a new kind of relationship began to form. It was not warm, it was not close, it was quiet and formal, and built on the fragile foundation of their newfound fear of my disapproval. They started to ask me questions about my work at the archive. They listened to my answers. They stopped offering me advice. They started treating me, not like a director, not like a hero, but simply like a separate, sovereign nation with its own laws and its own history. A nation they were finally learning to approach with a diplomat's caution. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. A few months ago, I was in the deep storage of the archive, working on a new acquisition. It was the personal papers of a woman who had been a pioneering female journalist in the 1950s. Her life had been extraordinary, full of adventure and courage, but she had died in obscurity, her accomplishments largely forgotten by history. As I carefully unfolded one of her letters, my hands protected by my white cotton gloves, I felt a profound sense of kinship with her. Her story mattered, not because it was famous, but because it was hers. She had lived it with integrity, and now, it was my job, my privilege, to preserve it, to honor it. And in that quiet, dusty room, surrounded by the ghosts of other people's lives, I finally understood. My own empowerment hadn't come from the moment a federal agent recognized me. It hadn't come from the look of shock on my family's faces. That was just the climax of their story, the end of their play. My real story, the one that mattered, was quieter. It was the story of the choices I made when no one was looking, the choice to serve, the choice to sacrifice, and finally, the choice to walk away and build a life of peace, on my own terms. My father was wrong. I was never a cog in the machine. I was the director, not just of an intelligence agency, but of my own life. And my final act as director was to declassify myself, to step out of the shadows and into the quiet, simple light of my own truth. So, if you take anything away from this story, let it be this: do not let anyone else write your dossier. Do not let them define you, or categorize you, or file you away under a label that doesn't fit. You are the director of your own intelligence. You are the keeper of your own secrets. And you alone. Decide who has the clearance to see you for who you truly are. Your story is worth preserving. Honor it. Thank you for listening. This one was a big one. If you've stuck with me, it means the world. Hit that like and subscribe button. And please, share this with anyone who might need a reminder that they are in charge of their own narrative. Be good to yourselves, and I'll see you next time.